You know those mirrors where sometimes you catch a glimpse of your back? Like you always look in the mirror and you see your front. You think, I look pretty good. And then every once in a while you catch a glimpse of one of those side mirrors and you see your back. And you're like, oh shoot, I have a lot of back fat. Or maybe there's a picture of you walking on the beach. This is what happened to me. Picture of me walking on the beach. I'm like, oh crud, I am definitely not in shape. So back fat is a serious issue. And there's some ways that you can get rid of it, but I have to be honest, you can't just magically erase just your back fat. But you can take a look at your diet, you can take a look at specific hormones, and you can take a look at cool little biohacks and really implement them to be able to reduce the impact of that back fat and get the body that you want. So we're going to dive into this and we're going to largely focus on the estrogen piece, and then we're going to focus on these little biohack things that you can introduce into your daily life to really get the most out of your life, but also get the most off of your back. Hey, I want to make sure that you hit that red subscribe button and then go ahead and hit that little bell icon to turn on notifications so you know whenever I go live. But now, let's go ahead and let's get to some back fat science. Okay, so full disclaimer before we dive all the way in. A lot of where you store fat comes down to your genetic sort of predisposition. Okay? Some people will store fat in one particular area of their body. That doesn't mean that you can't work a little bit harder towards getting fat off of that area though. Okay, spot reduction to some degree is somewhat possible. But we have to look at the big picture, and that's what we're going to do here, because I want you to get the lean back that you want. I don't want you to have those fat deposits that make you feel self-conscious. I've been there. So let's first start with the estrogen piece, because this, especially when it comes down to just back fat, is a big, big player. Okay, as we get older, even just over the age of 25, what ends up happening is we have an overabundance of estrogen for both men and women. Before women go through menopause, their estrogen levels tend to creep up and causes issues. But for men, you have testosterone levels that end up going through what's called aromatization and turning into estrogen. Now, estrogen is not a bad thing. We need it for recovery. We need it for just typical hormone modulation throughout the body anyway. But what ends up happening when we have an excess of it is it creates what is called excess thyroid binding globulin. And just like the name implies, it binds to our thyroid hormone. And our thyroid hormone regulates our metabolism. So if we have estrogen causing something that binds to this thyroid, imagine what ends up happening. It slows down our metabolism because now we don't have the thyroid ability to really rev up the metabolism. So estrogen causes this downward spiral. But there's one other thing you need to be paying attention to. Estrogen has a really powerful effect on your insulin. Okay, so once you start building up a little bit of fat, whether it's around the midsection or the back, then all of a sudden you're producing more insulin. And then that causes a chain reaction with estrogen, and then estrogen causes more insulin, and next thing you know, your blood sugar's high or you're insulin resistant and you're packing on more pounds than you ever knew were even possible, and you're not really doing anything. But the thing is, you are doing something, you just aren't aware of what's going in your body. So we're going to talk about what you can reduce and get out of your diet to be able to fix this issue. The first thing I want you to be paying attention to are Zeno and Phytoestrogens. Now, I'm not here to say avoid all of these things. I'm here to be practical, but there is one thing that I really think you should be conscious of, and that is the world of grains and gluten. Okay, so wheat and grains, things like that are very, very important to get out of your diet. Whether you are keto, whether you're low carb, paleo, vegan, whatever, get those out of your diet if you have an issue with estrogen imbalance and back fat, because they contain a specific xenoestrogen known as ZEA. Okay, ZEA is a xenoestrogen that literally comes from a mycotoxin. It's a fungus that grows on wheat. Now, you may be thinking like, okay, well, I have clean wheat. No, it's a microfungus that is going to be on virtually all wheat. You're going to find it. And ZEA has some interesting reactions within the body. So a study that was published in the Journal of Cell Chemical Biology found something pretty interesting. They found that people that were consuming high amounts of ZEA ended up having just a lower effectiveness of anti-estrogen drugs. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that these ZEAs had the ability to combat the effects of some of the most powerful anti-estrogenic drugs like letrozole. So you take a drug that's going to be for an anti-estrogen purpose, for whatever reason that might be. ZEAs are so powerful, they counteract those drugs. Imagine what that is doing inside your body. Okay, imagine, so ZEAs crush any anti-estrogen effect in your body. So now you have nothing to mitigate estrogen. So all of a sudden you've just unbound the ability for estrogen to just flourish in your body and fat to just deposit everywhere. It's scary stuff. So wheat and grains, just get those out of your diet. The next piece we got to talk about is soy. I'm not here to tell you once again that you need to get all soy out of your diet. I know you're human. I know that it's going to creep its way in. But what you need to do is be more conscious of the soy that is coming into your diet through all these different random places. Okay, there's soy in everything these days, and that's where I invite you to just really pay more attention. Okay, mayonnaise, soybean oil. Sardines, drenched in soybean oil. Ketchup, some soybean oil. Marinara sauce, what do you know? Soybean oil to thicken it. That's where this stuff creeps in. And soy is a phytoestrogen that mimics estrogen in the body. So it doesn't have any kind of crazy feedback loop or anything like that. It just literally acts as estrogen and binds to estrogen receptors. It is no different than taking an estrogen pill, because your body sees this phytoestrogen and just assumes it's estrogen, and next thing you know, estrogen levels go up and simultaneously testosterone levels drop because they work kind of opposite of each other. So to that same point, if you eat a lot of poultry, you may want to consider choosing the leaner options of poultry. Why? Because hormones and soy and things like that are going to sit in the fat a lot more. So there are studies that show that poultry has 4 times as much in the way of soy and 1,7-beta estradiol than cow and pig. Now, they discovered this by looking at the manure, which you might be thinking, well, that's not the food, that's the manure. No, that tells you how much is in the feed and how much is being stored in the body. So if you're going to have poultry, go for the leaner poultry, simply because then you're not going to have those hormones and those estrogens coming in. Because estrogen has an affinity for fat. It stores in fat and it works within the fat and adipose tissue. So lean poultry all the way. Also, if you use a bunch of whey protein powder, you might want to be thinking about that too, since soy can sometimes come through in the dairy. So if you eat a bunch of cheese, a bunch of whey protein, you just want to control that in moderation. That's why, generally speaking, when I have a protein shake, I'll use like a pea protein blend, simply because I'm not getting the soy that's coming through the dairy, but I'm also not getting the inflammatory component as well. So if you want a good recommendation on some pea protein, I highly, highly recommend that you check out Sun Warrior, because they're not just a normal pea protein. They have ketogenic in mind, they have fasting in mind, they have everything in mind when they formulate their product. So it's really, really cool. They add all the other aminos that they need to make it a complete protein. So anyhow, there's a special link down below. It's not going to be your magic pill to get rid of back fat, but I will say it's a great step to take when it comes down to consuming a cleaner protein that has less of the estrogenic impact on your body, especially when it comes down to a more plant-based protein. So definitely check them out after you watch this video down below in the description. Okay, and the last piece of the estrogen component are going to be the BPAs. Okay, a study that was published in Sterility and Fertility did take a look at 218 men, and they found that men that had a presence of BPAs in their urine were 3 times as likely to be at high risk for low levels of sperm. What that means is testosterone levels are lower, sperm count's lower, and the overall sperm travel is going to be lower. So what that tells us is, yes, there's a direct effect. The good news is we don't find BPAs nearly as much as we used to, even as much as like 2 years ago. Okay, most of the Tupperwares got rid of them, most of the straws and drinks got rid of them, so that's all a plus side, but you do need to be cognizant of that. Okay, now I want to touch really quick on a big one. You need to cut alcohol down to 2 times per week. Now, this doesn't have to be permanent, but if you are dealing with back fat, you're storing fat in a specific area, and it's more than likely having to do with, again, an estrogen dominance kind of thing. Alcohol has been shown to cause the conversion of androgens into estrogens. So the Journal of Toxicology published a study that found when subjects consumed ethanol, alcohol, they ended up having a significantly higher conversion of androgens over to estrogens. What that means is the hormones, the androgens that would normally make a man, were strongly getting converted into estrogen, and quickly. They also found that there were significantly less androgen receptors in the liver in those that were consuming the ethanol, meaning they had less potential ability to even receive male hormones because their body developed such an affinity for estrogen. So my point in saying this isn't that you need to just crush your alcohol habit altogether, but you do need to cut it down. And it's not just because alcohol is bad for your blood sugar and bad for your health, that's a given, but what it is that alcohol is going to trigger that aromatization. It is going to trigger more estrogen, which causes this chain reaction. Now let's get to some fun stuff though, and let's talk about some other things that you can implement into your life to directly get rid of back fat versus just cutting things out. First one, start using a sauna for 20 to 30 minutes, 2 to 3 times per week. And it's not just because you're sweating out toxins and sweating things out. No, it's different than that. It's all about a hormetic effect known as heat shock proteins. Heat shock proteins are the bee's knees. Okay, here's what they do. They are a stress-induced protective mechanism of the cell. Just like the name implies, they're a heat shock protein. So they come into effect as a protein that protects the cell because of heat shock. So when we're exposed to high amounts of heat for extended periods of time, these heat shock proteins come in and they protect the cell. And they allow a specific folding and unfolding of proteins to occur so that the cells can actually recover. Our cells are constantly getting bombarded by things, constantly bombarded by all kinds of different things that are affecting us in a good way and a bad way. But every once in a while, the cell just says, I need a break to actually recover. And these heat shock proteins, believe it or not, protect the cell for a little bit. They come in and they're like, uh-oh, there's extra heat, let's protect the cell. So they protect it, and while it's protected, it's like it has a force field around it so it can actually repair itself. What does this have to do with fat loss? Well, believe it or not, when you're sitting in that sauna, you also have a 58% increase in your norepinephrine levels. Norepinephrine is going to mobilize fat. So this is something that you can do just sitting there, literally sitting in a sauna. You don't have to do anything but just kind of suffer for a little bit, but meditate, think about your day, plan whatever, plan your kid's birthday party, whatever you got to do, just sit in the sauna, sweat, and expose yourself to heat and activate those heat shock proteins. Which leads me into the next thing, which is the opposite, cold therapy. Utilize cold showers, utilize cold plunges. Set your thermostat down to 66 degrees. Yes, that's what the studies show. 66 degrees triggers a lot more of an increase in uncoupling proteins. What is this all about? Believe it or not, yes, exposing yourself to a cold shower for 30 to 60 seconds every day, or jumping in an ice bath, or being in cold temperatures activates what are called uncoupling proteins. What is an uncoupling protein? An uncoupling protein is a protein that triggers brown fat to get activated. It triggers the browning of fat. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that your normal fat tissue that sits on your body that does nothing but look unsightly and insulate you actually becomes metabolically active. It turns brown because it gets more blood flow and it gets darker. We want blood flow to fat because blood flow to fat means that heat is dissipating. So that means all the energy that you're taking in from calories, rather than going and depositing fat in your back, it's going to actually get dissipated through these uncoupling proteins. These uncoupling proteins act as radiators, like those heat radiators that are in a dorm room when you don't have central air. Okay, they just emit heat. Power comes through it and emits heat. Well, in this case, calories come through and they emit heat, simply because you're exposing yourself to cold. Now, additionally, the blood flow restriction that ends up happening just from being exposed to cold, because the blood largely is going to go to your organs, that blood flow restriction limits the ATP production within the fat cell, which ends up making it so that potentially those fat cells will die. And then last but not least, when it comes down to the cold therapy, it's triggering stress on those fat cells, triggering a large amount of reactive oxygen species to attack a fat cell. So you're kind of, in a way, starving out the fat cell so that it ends up just getting bombarded with a bunch of just reactive oxygen species. Point is, do it. You don't need to do much. Literally 30 to 60 seconds of cold shower can make a big difference. Now it's time to treat yourself a little bit. Go get a massage, do some foam rolling. It's not just because you're pampering yourself. It's because you're taking care of yourself, and that self-care has a strong physiological response. Okay, what happens is you have these lymph nodes that are in your fascia, and they get balled up, and the lymph fluid can't really move through it. Lymph fluid is what mobilizes our immune system, so our immune system travels through the lymph. But guess what? Our fat travels through our lymph too. It doesn't just travel through blood. And what happens is when everything gets clogged up in our lymph system because of tight muscles, things like that, the lymph doesn't move as well. So if we're trying to mobilize fat from the back to actually get to the liver to get utilized, we need to do something about it. So what do we do about it? We get a massage or we foam roll, where it breaks up those knots and it gets the actual lymphatic fluid moving so the fat can get to where it needs to go. The fat needs to leave the station and get to the liver to get converted into a ketone, or to get metabolized, or to get put into whatever it needs to actually get utilized as. So a little bit of foam rolling goes a long way. And last but not least, and this is a big one, if you're going to choose an exercise to do to reduce the maximal amount of back fat, I highly recommend high-intensity interval training with a rower. Why? One, a rower is largely a full body movement. Huge surges of caloric burn. Huge surges of norepinephrine, which is going to mobilize fat long after the fact. Huge activation of your back, okay, which is largely neglected in a lot of cardio moves. You do a lot of running, next thing you know, you're hunched over. You do a lot of rowing, you're at least building the right posture. But you're also building the muscle in the right area that, quite frankly, gives you the illusion of a leaner back. A big part of training a particular muscle isn't about burning the fat in that given area. It's about building that muscle up so that you create the illusion. I mean, I'm not a bodybuilder, and a lot of you probably aren't, but if you've ever realized, the whole world of bodybuilding is all about creating an illusion. Some of these guys aren't even all that big, but they look big on stage because they've created an illusion by making them look leaner and smaller in different places. The point is that if you tone up your back via rowing, it does build an awesome physique. Rowers have really good physiques with really wide V-taper backs, and it helps a lot. Now, the other piece of the equation is when you incorporate your upper body into a high intensity interval move, it does something really cool. You see, we have a little bit less in the way of the ability to transfer blood from the heart to the upper body. It means the heart has to work harder because there's less perfusion. Okay, so the heart has to work harder to push blood through the little veins in our arms, which means you get your heart rate up higher, which means you get more with less. 5 minutes on a rower of high intensity is probably, I'm gonna guess here, equal to probably 10 or 12 minutes of high intensity on a treadmill, because you're actually activating these muscles in your upper body that don't usually get the conditioning. It's just a shock to the system that will tone you up really, really fast. I know I covered a lot of ground, and I hope that you got some notes taken, because this is really going to help you out, whether it's back fat, chest fat, or whatever. I know I focus more on back fat. I think this is going to really pave the way for you. So as you're looking to embark on your health journey, and as you're looking to get in the best possible shape, I invite you to remember my story. I've lost 100 pounds. You can do this too. I'll see you in the next video.